Hey Gosha, thanks a lot for joining us again. So today we were actually hoping to get to our audience a little bit more information about estate laws and some of the recent changes that actually took place. So I've actually heard that there are some changes that are taking place with estate laws in Ontario, specifically related to marriage or separations. Could you tell us a bit more about these changes and how they'll affect people's estate planning?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few changes that have taken place this year through legislation that was passed back in April. But there's two areas that I thought maybe would be good to highlight for our clients today. And one of the changes impacts marriage, and the other impacts the flip side of the coin, which is separation, and the effects that these have on a person's estate plan. So currently in Ontario, the law was that, or is that, if you have a will and then you get married, it's automatically going to revoke your will. And this has been considered problematic for a long time now. So part of the legislation has meant to address this problem.
Okay. And can you elaborate a little bit on this? Why has this first change been an issue in the past?
Okay, so there's two ways or two examples that I like to flag for people in terms of the way that the law was set up. If you had a will and you got married, it was automatically revoked, and then you had to go through the process of making sure that you put a new will in place. A couple areas where this was causing a problem. One, blended families are much more common now, and what was happening when individuals would remarry is that their previous estate planning that was done in consideration of their previous family structure, the children that they had from their prior marriage, was just basically out the window, and they had to start again in terms of making sure that some planning was put in place. So sometimes people who are remarrying don't necessarily want to have their previous planning revoked. There may be different reasons why they're getting remarried, or there may be a different family structure that they have to take into account. So having their previous will revoked was proving problematic, especially because some people were not realizing that that's what was happening. It was opening up a lot of litigation amongst family members on the death of that person. So the second area that I like to highlight actually is problems that we were seeing in something that in our industry we call predatory marriages. So, people are living longer, but they're not necessarily living well. They're potentially, lots of higher incidences of dementia and other capacity issues. Unfortunately, the capacity threshold to get married is much lower than for a lot of other transactions that adults can enter into. So what we were seeing is the vulnerable older adults were entering into these marriages in the twilight of their lives. And the result was that their long established estate plan, their will, was automatically being revoked. And they may not even have realized that that was what was going to happen. So again, it was creating these issues where the families would realize after the fact that because of this marriage, the will was revoked, and the new spouse would, make certain claims against the estate, and it would conflict with the previous family or the kids from a prior marriage. I mean, let me be clear, some older adults have perfectly good capacity and want to remarry, but it may be for different reasons at that age. They just, it's companionship reasons, it's whatever the reason for entering into the marriage at that stage of their life. It's usually not like with younger people who are trying to commingle their assets. So this was creating a bit of an issue as well. So I think the revision to the law, which now is going to allow people's will to continue, even if they get married or remarried, your will isn't going to be automatically revoked. I think that's going to save a lot of people some stress.
Yeah, and you know what? That's shocking actually, because it's not things that you actually consider unless you've actually experienced it or seen someone go through it, right?
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said. When you're younger, you have a different goal in mind. It's to start a family and grow that family, and you have those plans, as opposed to if for example, if you're older, you might want to just have that companionship and that's it. So different reasons for getting married, but it's the exact same thing and shouldn't be treated the exact same way, right? You should have that option to not have your will revoked and
Yes, exactly.
start with the blank
Yeah.
slate at that point. So definitely, and it's exactly what you said too. The whole idea of just the barrier for marriage compared to, like, for example, my industry. If you have a mortgage, right, to try and get a mortgage, you literally have to give everything up front, right? And you have to have that full transparency and everything has to show, and they literally dig into every single detail. Whereas, if someone gets married, there could be a lot of reasons, like you were saying, and the ultimate end goal might not be the same for different people. So it's definitely something that they need to look into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in this case, how about the second change that you actually had mentioned?
Yeah, so it was funny, like I was saying, it's kind of, they've dealt with the both sides of the coin, right? In the sense of not revoking people's wills because they've gotten married, but then it used to be an issue ongoing for people who were separated and not legally divorced. There was an impact to their wills previously. And the change that has taken place is that if you are legally separated, and there's a definition involved in the law that, establishes that status, if that's the case for you, then your will is read on your death as if your ex had died before you. So whatever your alternate gift plan was, usually it's your children, that is the gifting that would take place under your will. Because prior to this change, people who were legally divorced had that built into the law, where the will would be read as if the spouse that they had legally divorced from had died before them. But it wasn't covering this group of people who were legally separated, but not yet formally divorced. And I can tell you, there's a lot of times I've come across clients where they've been separated for years, but they, for some reason or another, just never got around to doing the formal process of a full divorce. And I think that it had slipped people's minds that, it would still create some legal entitlements for that spouse against your estate, and your will would be read as if, they're still part of the picture. And it was also creating some litigation issues for these families. So I think both of these laws are significant improvement in the sense they reduce a lot of the stress and unknowns for families. If you don't happen to get around to updating your documents, which is, to me, that's the number one rule. If you have a life change, go get your documents updated. Don't rely on these backup nets to catch you. But, worst case scenario, if you didn't have that opportunity, at least now there's more protection based on the way that things have changed.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say are the key things for people to keep in mind if they are separated in this case?
So, I mean, obviously, like I said, if you don't have any intention of reconciling, you're going to want to look at your planning again and make sure that you update your documents at a minimum. But if you don't happen to have that opportunity, at least you have some breathing room to know that your will would be read as if the ex had predeceased you. So there's some comfort in that. Obviously, everybody has their reasons for not wanting to go through the formal divorce process. Sometimes it's psychological, sometimes it's cultural. Certain communities, there's a lot of stigma involved with the formal divorce, whereas maybe you can get away with living separately for a really long time and nobody really, people take it in stride.
Yeah.
So there's that impact as well. But at the end of the day, and we've talked about this in the previous visit that I had with you, which is that if there's a major life event that's going to happen for you, you really need to revisit your planning, make sure your documents make sense, are up to date, and reach out to somebody with the right expertise for that.
For sure. And from what you're saying, there's a lot of loopholes or places where you could trip up and not exactly have everything that you're dedicating your life to building that wealth or that net worth that you want to pass on to your children, go to the right place, right? And if you're
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you're growing a tree to eat the apples from the tree, if you grow it in your neighbor's yard and you can't get to it, then what's the point,
There's
right?
no point. Yeah. No,
Exactly.
100%.
So definitely. So just to quickly summarize what you were saying. So the first
Yeah.
change is that if people are getting married, the will doesn't get revoked anymore, which is in this case, it avoids that predatory scenario and also helps with mixed families and such. And also the second change is that if you're separated based on the specific definitions that the law has, not just divorced, the will is read as if your spouse had died before you. So the estates would still go to the kids. So
yes, exactly.
Situations.
Yeah.
So
it basically flows to your alternate planning. Exactly.
To the alternate. Yeah. So not just in the case of divorces, but also for separations as well, just so that the same idea is kind of kept congruent in that sense. And
exactly.
And now, if you're remarried, for example, just in a scenario, the estate would be going to your kids from the previous marriage, if that's what you had intended, with the will not getting automatically revoked if you were to get into a new marriage. And you would have to intentionally make a new will to include everyone from the new marriage if you wanted things to be distributed a certain way. Whereas
that's
there's
right.
less chance of oversight and having the new family get an even distribution if you've spent your whole life 40 years or something with your previous family and then just got into the marriage like 6 months in, a year in, and you wanted to leave more to your previous family because they were there throughout your whole life, right? So
those are exactly the sorts of scenarios that this is hopefully going to prevent.
Amazing. Honestly, it's having perspective and knowing all the things that could go wrong. Honestly, it gives a full framework of how you should be planning your estate, and that's honestly what I was hoping to get out there just to myself. So thanks a lot, Gosha, for sharing all that information.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me again.